What if I told you that behind the world's most famous poet of love and wisdom, Jalaluddin Rumi, lies a hidden story that most people have never truly understood? We know his verses, quoted in books and whispered in gatherings, but few know the fire that ignited them. Rumi was not always the mystic who spoke of hearts burning for the divine. He was once a scholar, respected and disciplined, a jurist surrounded by students and admirers. Yet something happened. A meeting so intense, a friendship so transformative, that it shattered the life he knew and opened the door to the poetry that would make him immortal. The secret of Rumi's life is not only in the beauty of his words, but in the pain, longing, and love that birthed them. To know Rumi is to journey through the story of exile knowledge and a soul set ablaze by a wandering dervish who vanished as suddenly as he appeared. This is the secret of Rumi's life you never knew existed. In the 13th century, as the world trembled under Mongol invasions and kingdoms clashed in endless wars, a boy was born who would one day be remembered not for conquest or crowns, but for words that would outlive empires. His name was Jalaluddin Muhammad al-Rumi, known simply to history as Rumi, one of the greatest spiritual poets of all time. But before he was a poet, he was a scholar, a jurist, and a man whose life was shaped by exile, learning, and a journey that only Allah could have written. Rumi was born in 1207 CE in the city of Balkh, a center of learning and trade in the region we now call Afghanistan. His father, Bahadur Walid, was a man of knowledge, a respected preacher and jurist. But the winds of history were harsh. The Mongols were advancing across Central Asia, destroying cities, scattering families, and striking fear in the hearts of all. When Rumi was still a child, his father chose exile over destruction. He gathered his family and set out on a long journey westward, leaving behind the home of his ancestors. The family traveled across lands filled with scholars and mystics, absorbing wisdom wherever they went. They stopped in Nishapur, where the young Rumi met the great poet Fariduddin Attar, who gifted him a book of spiritual tales. Attar, seeing something special in the boy, is said to have remarked, "This child will set fire to hearts across the world." The journey continued through Baghdad, Damascus, and Mecca, before finally settling in Konya in Anatolia, a land ruled by the Seljuks, far from the Mongol threat. It was here that Rumi would grow into the man who became a legend. From a young age, Rumi absorbed the Qur'an and Hadith with intensity. He studied under his father, then under his father's student Burhan al-Din Mohaqiq, who trained him in Islamic jurisprudence, theology, and Sufism. He mastered the sciences of his time, tafsir, fiqh, logic, philosophy, and became known as a serious, disciplined scholar. People began calling him Maulana, or Master, a title of respect for his deep knowledge. By the time he reached adulthood, Rumi was already established as a teacher. He gave fatwas, taught students, and delivered sermons that drew crowds. His words were filled with clarity, his reasoning sharp, his authority unquestioned. He lived the life of a scholar in the traditional sense, devoted to law, teaching, and the service of his community. But within this life of respect and scholarship, something deeper stirred. Though Rumi mastered books, he longed for something beyond knowledge, something of the heart. He studied the works of earlier Sufi masters and began practicing dhikr, fasting and nights of prayer. Still, his path was that of a jurist. His reputation was not that of a poet, but of a man of law and faith. His world, however, was about to change in a way no one could have imagined. History often remembers the moment when a scholar becomes a mystic, when knowledge turns into burning love for Allah. For Rumi, that moment came through a meeting that would alter his soul forever. The man was known as Shams al-Tabrizi, a wandering dervish, a mystic who cared little for status, wealth, or position. Shams was unpredictable, fiery and consumed with longing for Allah. Where Rumi was the master of books, Shams was the master of hearts. Where Rumi was respected in Konya, Shams was a stranger, often misunderstood and dismissed. Yet Allah willed that these two would meet, and in their meeting, a fire would be lit that would burn through the centuries. Before Shams entered his life, Rumi was known for discipline and scholarship. After Shams, the world would know him as a poet of divine love, a man whose heart spoke in verses that crossed languages and nations. But that secret, the secret of Rumi's life that few truly understand, lay hidden in the encounter between these two men, one of books and one of fire. And so, the stage was set. Rumi, the respected jurist of Konya, surrounded by students and admirers, confident in his knowledge and authority. And Shams, the wandering dervish, a man who carried the flame of love and could ignite hearts with a single glance. Their paths were about to cross, and when they did, the scholar of law would be transformed into the poet of eternity. The secret of Rumi's life, the one that most people today know only through fragments of poetry and romanticized tales, was not in his fame, nor in his verses alone. It was in this transformation, born from a friendship that shook his entire existence. And that story begins in Konya, in a chance encounter that was anything but chance. The day Rumi met Shams al-Tabrizi was the day his life changed forever. Until then, Rumi was known as a respected jurist and scholar of Konya, a man who taught law, interpreted Qur'an, and guided students with precision. People came from near and far to sit in his lectures, and his reputation stretched across the Seljuk lands. He was Maulana, our master, a man whose words carried weight. Yet behind the structured life of scholarship, his heart yearned for something deeper, something the books could not quench. Shams, on the other hand, was the opposite of all that Rumi represented. A wandering dervish from Tabriz, he was a man of fire and unpredictability, consumed with love for Allah. Where Rumi spoke with discipline, Shams spoke with passion. Where Rumi carried the respect of crowds, Shams carried solitude. He was not bound by the traditions of society or the restraints of formality. He was, in every sense, the mirror Rumi did not know he needed. Their meeting is remembered in many ways. One story says that Shams walked into Konya and asked a question that shook Rumi's very core. "Who is greater?" Shams asked. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or the mystic Bayezid al-Bistami. The question seemed outrageous, even offensive, to many ears. But when Rumi heard it, his heart stopped. Shams explained, Bayezid once declared, "Glory be to me.
How great is my majesty!"
While the Prophet, peace be upon him, at the height of his closeness to Allah during the Miraj, said only, "Glory be to you, O Allah, I cannot praise you enough." Shams' point pierced Rumi's heart. The Prophet's humility, even in the presence of Allah, was the highest station of all. In that moment, the scholar of law felt something new. Not just knowledge, but fire. From that day on, Shams and Rumi were inseparable. They spent days and nights in deep conversation, speaking of love, longing, dhikr, and the mysteries of the soul. Rumi, who once lectured to crowds, now sat with Shams in silence, listening as if hearing the Qur'an for the first time. Shams awakened in him a thirst that no book could satisfy, the thirst for direct experience of Allah's love. The people of Konya were astonished. Their master, once so focused on law and sermons, now seemed transformed. He laughed more, he cried more. He spent hours in seclusion with Shams, and he spoke in ways that touched the heart rather than only the mind. Students grew restless, whispering that Shams was taking their teacher away. Some accused Shams of sorcery, others of corruption. They could not understand that what Shams had given Rumi was not distraction, but awakening. Their companionship was intense, almost overwhelming. Shams once said, "I am fire and Rumi is tinder." When we are together, the fire burns so brightly that people cannot bear to look. For Rumi, Shams was not just a friend, but a mirror of his soul. In Shams' presence, he saw his own longing reflected back at him, magnified and purified. It was as if Allah had sent him a reminder that true knowledge is not in words, but in the heart that burns for its Lord. Yet such intensity drew envy. The students once devoted to Rumi felt pushed aside. They murmured that Shams was stealing their master, clouding his mind, taking him away from the path of respectability. Their whispers grew into anger, and their anger turned to hatred. The more Rumi withdrew into his friendship with Shams, the more resentment grew in Konya. One night, Shams vanished. Some say he was murdered by jealous students. Others say he left to test Rumi's devotion. Whatever the truth, his absence tore Rumi apart. The man who had lit his soul was gone, and Rumi felt an emptiness like death itself. He searched desperately, sending letters, traveling, calling out for his beloved friend. But Shams did not return. It was in this grief, this burning separation, that Rumi's true transformation took place. What had been awakened by Shams now blazed within him on its own. He began to express his longing, his love, his pain, not in sermons or fatwas, but in poetry, in music, and in dance. The scholar of law had become a poet of the soul. Rumi would later say, "What I had thought of before as God, I met today in a human being." By this he did not mean Shams was divine, but that Shams had been the door through which he discovered the depth of Allah's love. Shams was the spark, but the flame was Allah himself. From that moment, verses poured out of Rumi like rivers. He sang of longing and union, of the pain of separation, of the sweetness of surrender. His followers saw him whirl in circles, his body spinning as his heart turned to Allah. And the Sema, the whirling dance of the dervishes, was born. The people who once whispered against him now listened in awe. His poetry spread far beyond Konya, crossing languages and cultures, until centuries later his words would be read by millions across the world. But behind the beauty of his verses lay the secret most never knew. They were born from the fire of Shams, from the love that broke his heart and remade it for Allah. The scholar had become a lover, the jurist had become a poet, and the master of law had become the master of hearts. And though Shams had vanished, his presence lived on in every verse Rumi wrote, in every tear he shed, and in every heart his words touched. The disappearance of Shams was the wound that opened Rumi's heart forever. The man who had set him ablaze with love for Allah was gone, leaving only longing and grief. At first, it was unbearable. Rumi wandered the streets of Konya like a man lost, calling Shams' name, searching in every corner. He wrote letters, he questioned travelers. He even traveled himself in the hope of finding his beloved friend. But Shams was nowhere to be found. Some whispered that he had been murdered by jealous disciples. Others believed he had left deliberately to test Rumi's devotion. Whatever the truth, one reality remained: Rumi was alone. And yet, it was in this loneliness that the true transformation took place. The fire Shams had kindled did not die, it grew. What had once been conversation between two men now became dialogue with the divine. The absence of Shams forced Rumi to turn inward, and in his heart he discovered that what he longed for was not the man, but Allah himself. Shams had been the spark, but the flame was eternal, and it burned now with greater strength than ever before. It was then that Rumi began to speak in a new language, the language of poetry, music, and dance. No longer did he sit only as a jurist delivering rulings. Now he rose in the gatherings of Diwan, whirling in ecstasy. his body spinning like the planets, his soul circling around the beloved. The Sema, the whirling dance of the dervishes, was born from his longing, the body turning, the heart remembering Allah, the soul seeking union. From his lips poured verses that would fill volumes. The Masnavi, his 6-volume masterpiece, became known as the Qur'an in Persian, not because it replaced the Qur'an, never, but because it was soaked in its spirit, retelling its stories, reflecting its light, and turning revelation into poetry of the heart. Every tale, every line, carried within it the cry of a man who had tasted love and loss and discovered the truth behind both. Rumi's poetry was not written in the comfort of ease, but in the burning of longing. His famous words about love, quoted today in books, songs, and gatherings, were not empty phrases. They were the voice of a heart that had been broken and remade in the fire of divine love. He wrote of separation and union, of longing and arrival, of pain and ecstasy. Behind every line was the memory of Shams, and beyond that, the presence of Allah. He once said, "What you seek is seeking you." For Rumi, the loss of Shams revealed this truth. All along, it was not Shams he sought, but the beloved through Shams. The friend had vanished, but the friend of all friends had revealed himself. His verses remind us that every love in this world is only a mirror of the greater love that awaits us with Allah. As Rumi's poetry spread, people came from across the world to hear him. His gatherings were filled with seekers who found in his words something no other scholar or poet could give them. He spoke of the soul as a reed flute, torn from its reed bed, crying out in longing for the source from which it came. He spoke of the heart as a mirror that must be polished until it reflects nothing but the light of Allah. He spoke of love as a fire that burns away everything but the truth. Yet through it all, Rumi never abandoned his faith. His poetry was not separate from Islam. It was rooted in Qur'an and Sunnah, in prayer, in fasting, in dhikr. He was still the scholar who had memorized the Qur'an, still the jurist who knew the law, still the man who prayed with humility. But now he was more. He had become a bridge between knowledge and love, between law and longing, between earth and heaven. Rumi lived out the rest of his years in Konya, surrounded by students, followers, and lovers of poetry. His home became a place where the wealthy and the poor, the scholar and the seeker, the ruler and the servant all gathered to hear his words. He continued to write, to teach, and to whirl until his death in 1273 CE. When he passed, people of all faiths, Muslims, Christians, Jews, gathered to mourn him, for his words had touched them all. He was buried in Konya, where his shrine stands to this day, visited by millions. His followers established the Mevlavi order, known for their whirling remembrance of Allah. But his true legacy was not in a tomb or an order. It was in his words, his verses, his stories, which continue to breathe life into hearts centuries later. The secret of Rumi's life, the one many never knew, is that his poetry was born not of ease but of suffering, not of comfort but of longing. It was the absence of Shams, the fire of grief, that transformed him from scholar to poet, from jurist to mystic, from master of books to master of hearts. His words endure because they carry within them the truth every soul feels, the pain of separation from its source, and the hope of reunion with the beloved. Rumi once said, "Don't get lost in your pain. Know that one day your pain will become your cure." This was the secret of his own life. His pain became his cure. His longing became his poetry. His loss became his legacy. And that is why, even today, his words echo across the world, reminding us that the greatest love is not of this world, but of the one who created it. That every heartbreak is a doorway, every separation a reminder, and every longing a call to return to Allah. This is the secret of Rumi's life. the secret that transformed his grief into verses of eternity, and his silence into words that continue to set hearts ablaze.